Hello, BookTube. Today I want to discuss with you the problem of evil. And so, of course, our discussion starts where every such discussion should start. We open up this computer here. We search for Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Problem of Evil. Quote, the basic idea behind the direct inductive formulation of the argument for evil is that the argument involves a crucial inductive step that takes the form of inductive projection. Or generalization, which one moves from a person concerning the nominal properties of some state of affairs to include another likely, overall more worth state of affairs in all more properties both known and unknown. Such a direct argument might present. The Problem of Pain is a very short book by C.S. Lewis. I find that most of the book doesn't really speak to me. It feels as though it is written for a specifically Christian reader, and I'm not that reader. But the introduction, on the other hand, seems to be written for anyone. And so the introduction to C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain is really fascinating. Before we jump in and read what C.S. Lewis has to say, I want to read a quote from a children's book, The Wind in the Willows, by Kenneth Grahame. This is a book that was first published in 1908. And the reason I want to start with this quote is because it gets quoted by C.S. Lewis. And I think more than anything else, this captures, this distills the argument that we're about to read. And so in this children's book, we have all these personified animals. And so Otter is a character, and he's missing his son. And so Mole and Rat go to look for him. And they get on a boat, and they travel to like this island, and they meet this kind of mystical creature, this Piper. The name of the chapter is Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And at the foot of this Piper, they find the child that they're looking for. As they approach this island, Mole has a sense of recognition. He feels like he's been here before. Quote, then suddenly the Mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy, but it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently. We get more descriptions. There's a music that they hear that's sort of drawing them in. And then we get this dialogue. Mole says, quote, Rat, he found breath to whisper, shaking, are you afraid? Afraid? Murmured the Rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. Afraid? Of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh Mole, I am afraid. End quote. So what does C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, say in this introduction to The Problem of Pain? He starts off by talking about how he used to be an atheist. And so he's sort of going to explain to us the transition he made. And so he describes how it was very intuitive to him at one point in time that clearly we live in a world of suffering. We must definitely live in a godless universe. And then he says, quote, there was one question which I never dreamed of raising. I never noticed that the very strength and facility of the pessimist's case at once poses us a problem. If the universe is so bad, or even half so bad, How on earth did human beings ever come to attribute it to the activity of a wise and good creator? End quote. And so this is a very important question for C.S. Lewis, and I would suggest that it's a great question. And so his argument is that it comes from a direct experience. Quote, suppose you were told there was a tiger in the next room. You would know that you were in danger and would probably feel fear. But if you were told there is a ghost in the next room and believed it, you would feel indeed what is often called fear, but of a different kind. It is uncanny rather than dangerous. And the special kind of fear it excites may be called dread. Now suppose that you were told simply, there is a mighty spirit in the room, and believed it. Your feelings would then be even less like the mere fear of danger, but the disturbance would be profound. You would feel wonder and a certain shrinking, a sense of inadequacy to cope with such a visitation. This feeling may be described as awe, and the object which excites it as the numinous. And one of the examples that he gives, and C.S. Lewis gives many examples, is that wonderful scene in The Wind in the Willows with rat and mole. There seem, in fact, to be only two views we can hold about awe. Either it is a mere twist in the human mind, or else it is a direct experience of the really supernatural, to which the name revelation might properly be given. End quote. And so there you go. That's the argument. The argument says we can't explain why human beings, intellectually, spiritually, morally developed human beings, should have a sense of the numinous. So let's attribute them, C.S. Lewis suggests, to a kind of revelation. There's something there which is true to ultimate reality. There's this human intuition which is in touch with something, and it transcends the logical. So that is piece number one. The second step, the second of the three steps that C.S. Lewis identifies as being essential to all religions, is a sense of morality. This innate conception that human beings have of right and wrong. Quote, all the human beings that history has heard of acknowledge some kind of morality. That is, they feel towards certain proposed actions the experiences expressed by the words I ought or I ought not. Elsewhere, all men alike stand condemned, not by alien codes of ethics, but by their own. And all men, therefore, are conscious of guilt. So that's step 1 and 2. And then step 3 for C.S. Lewis. Quote, the third stage in religious development arises when men identify them, when the numinous power to which they feel awe is made the guardian of the morality to which they feel obligation. So what do we make of this argument? Is C.S. Lewis right? Is the argument compelling? Personally, I don't think so. What C.S. Lewis is working with here, what he's trying to describe and touch upon, is the very difficult world of phenomenology, of subjective internal human experience. To highlight why I think it's not a compelling argument, I think you could follow a similar format for many other phenomenological experiences. Human beings, mature human beings, psychically, philosophically, spiritually developed human beings experience love. They experience love towards other humans or other animals. Why? Why should that experience be possible? You can shuffle around sex drive, you can shuffle around the need for cooperation, but where do you get love from? It doesn't seem to be necessary. You can make the same argument for any phenomenological experience that we can't explain, because no phenomenological experience can really be explained. Even our experiences of color. To answer C.S. Lewis's great question, why do these things exist? Why does the sense of awe exist? Why does the sense of the numinous exist? We can't try to answer why those experiences are experienced the way they're experienced. But we could try to answer, why might it be adaptive? Why might it be healthy or useful for a human creature to behave in such a way? So, if we take the example of love, which I think is a useful test case for this kind of reasoning, we could say, I can't explain the experience of love, the phenomenology of love. But I can say that it's maybe useful for a species of animal to form these tight kind of connections that are helpful in building stable family units, that are helpful in creating some sort of long-term lasting relationship that doesn't just rely and revolve around sex. Similarly for morality. C.S. Lewis cannot explain why human beings have a sense of morality. And of course, I can't either. Who can? But what you can say is that it's helpful, it's adaptive for a society, for a species of animal to treat each other within a community in a way that is helpful, in a way that is cooperative, in a way that isn't antagonistic and self-destructive. And lastly, when we get to this question of awe, it's another similar kind of thing. We would expect, if you're being surveilled by your friends, if your behavior is being watched, an awareness of the fact that you're being observed. The sense of awe that C.S. Lewis is talking about also can be adaptive in communal settings. So these things can be explained. So where does that leave us here? What I think C.S. Lewis does very effectively, very compellingly, in this small number of pages. If he doesn't convince the reader that he's right, he gives the reader an opportunity to try on his glasses. It's like he's saying to the reader, this is how I see the world. This is the world I inhabit. And you, the reader, are going to have an opportunity to see what that's like. What does it mean to live in this kind of world? And of course, the answer to that question that C.S. Lewis is giving, the nature of these lenses, is a sense of mystery, a sense of awe, a sense of kind of surveillance, a sense of encounter, an ennobling kind of encounter. It's a redemptive kind of encounter. It's an encounter which is searing, but also cleansing and purifying. He ends his introduction with one last argument, which is, I think, quite different from the main thrust of the argument he outlined before this. Quote, at every stage of religious development, man may rebel, if not without violence to his own nature, yet without absurdity. He can close his spiritual eyes against the numinous, if he is prepared to part company with half the great poets and prophets of his race, with his own childhood, with the richness and depth of uninhibited experience. He can regard the moral law as an illusion, and so cut himself off from the common ground of humanity. He can refuse to identify the numinous with the righteous, but the cost is heavy. End quote. And this last argument with which he ends this introduction is that it's not illogical It's not irrational to reject religion. In fact, we might add it's very rational. It's very logical. But he says it's something hard to leave behind. It's hard to let go of. It means parting ways with something. What he calls half the great poets and prophets of his race. His own childhood with the richness and depth of uninhibited experience. And I think for many people, that's hard to do. Thanks for watching.